The world had been peaceful, or so it seemed, as the sun set over the quiet cities of Earth. But all that changed in an instant. The sky, once filled with stars, suddenly darkened as massive alien ships appeared from the void. They were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Towering warships, sleek and menacing, dropped out of hyperspace with frightening precision, casting shadows over the cities below. Captain Ethan Ford had just finished his shift at a military base when the alarm sounded. At first, it was hard to believe. The earth trembled as a shockwave hit the base, rattling the windows and sending dust cascading down the hallways. Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't anything he had trained for. A cold, suffocating silence followed as the first explosions ripped across the planet's surface. He rushed outside, his boots crunching on the dirt, and looked up to see the sky crack open as the alien ships began their bombardment. The air was thick with smoke, and the sky was filled with flashes of fiery light. The impact was deafening. Buildings crumbled, and massive fires spread through the streets. It was as if the earth itself had been hit by a fist of destruction from the heavens. Ethan tried to make sense of it all. What the hell is happening? He whispered to himself as the base's communication systems buzzed with static. Panic spread quickly. Soldiers scrambled for cover, but there was nowhere safe. The air was thick with the sound of engines roaring and weapons firing. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his gear, his rifle, and ran to the command center. The ground shook again as a massive explosion rocked the base, knocking him off his feet. The sky was filled with alien drones, robotic fighters, and massive weaponry. They were everywhere, swooping down from the sky and wiping out anything in their path. His fellow soldiers were already engaging, but it was clear that humanity stood no chance. The aliens had come prepared. Their technology was far beyond anything humans had. He heard a voice crackling over the intercom. "We need to evacuate. The city is falling." Repeat, "The city is falling." Ethan's mind raced. He needed to find his squad. As he ran through the chaos, he could hear the screams of civilians, the sirens of emergency vehicles, and the blinding roar of gunfire. There was no time to think, only time to act. He ducked behind a ruined wall, looking around for his team. As he turned the corner, he saw them, soldiers fighting back, but it was like trying to stop a flood with their hands. The enemy was everywhere, relentless, and their weapons tore through anything in their way. Ethan's squad was surrounded. His heart skipped a beat. Without hesitation, he pulled his rifle up and ran to join them. His team returned fire, trying to hold their ground, but it was hopeless. Ethan shot 2 alien drones as they swooped in to attack. The explosion from one of the drones sent him flying backward, his world spinning. He woke up to find himself lying on the cold ground. His ears rang, and his vision was blurred. The sounds of battle were still loud in the distance, but closer now was the unmistakable sound of alien footsteps. His breath quickened. Was this it? Was he going to die here, alone? A shadow loomed over him, and he forced his eyes to focus. A figure, a tall mechanical soldier with glowing red eyes, stood above him, its weapon raised. Ethan's hand reached for his sidearm, but before he could draw it, something else happened. The mechanical soldier's head exploded in a burst of fire. Another soldier, human, this time, had arrived. He shot down the remaining alien forces around Ethan's position. "Get up, Captain," the soldier shouted, pulling him to his feet. Ethan's legs wobbled, but he pushed himself upright, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't know who had saved him, but he didn't have time to ask. They ran together, dodging alien fire as they sprinted toward the last remaining defense lines. It was clear that Earth wasn't ready for this kind of war. The world had been blindsided by a force too powerful, too fast for anything human technology could handle. The soldier, panting, looked at him. The planet's lost. The resistance is already preparing for a counterattack. We need to move now, or we'll all be dead. Counterattack? Are you serious? Ethan said, shocked. "We don't have a choice," the soldier responded. "Get to the rendezvous point. It's the only chance we have." Ethan nodded. The world as he knew it was gone. Earth had been invaded, and there was no time to waste. They had to fight back. He didn't know how they would win, but he knew one thing for sure. Humanity would not give up. Not without a fight. As they raced toward safety, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play. These aliens were not just invaders. They were here for a purpose. And if the human race had any hope of survival, they would need to figure out what that purpose was. The night sky burned above them, and the war for humanity's survival had only just begun. The world was changing, and not in a way anyone had ever imagined. Captain Ethan Ford's feet hit the ground with a heavy thud as he and the soldier who had saved him sprinted through the wreckage of what had once been a thriving city. Buildings smoldered in the background, and the distant sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air. Humanity's greatest enemy, the alien invaders, had torn through Earth like a storm, and now it was time for survival. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as they ran. The soldier beside him, a grizzled man with a scar running across his face, glanced at him. "You good, Captain?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He was still processing the chaos that had unfolded. In the blink of an eye, their world had been turned upside down. The planet was under attack by a force so advanced, so deadly, that humanity had barely managed to put up a fight. The fight for survival wasn't just about weapons or technology. It was about will. And if there was one thing Ethan knew, it was that humans had that in spades. They reached a hidden entrance, an old underground tunnel used for emergencies long before anyone had ever imagined something like this happening. Ethan's mind raced as they descended into the darkness. As the sounds of destruction above faded away, they entered a starkly different world. One that smelled of dust, stale air, and the quiet hum of technology. They weren't alone. The underground base was buzzing with activity. People were huddled together, talking in low voices, their faces drawn with fear, but also determination. Ethan saw civilians, soldiers, engineers, and even doctors, all working together. The resistance was forming, and it was clear that despite the overwhelming odds, humanity wasn't ready to just roll over. Ethan's guide led him to a command center where a group of leaders had gathered. There were no fancy uniforms here. Everyone was dressed in ragged clothes, some still covered in dirt from the last battle. A map of Earth, marked with alien-controlled zones, was pinned to the wall. A woman, probably in her mid-30s, stepped forward. Her eyes were tired, but there was a fire in them. "You must be Captain Ford," she said, her voice firm yet welcoming. "I'm Commander Rachel, and this is where we plan our next move." Ethan shook her hand, trying not to show how much his heart was still racing. "I've seen what they're capable of. We need a plan, and we need it fast." Rachel nodded. "The planet is lost. Earth's major military forces were wiped out in the first wave. We've got pockets of survivors scattered across the globe, but nothing that would stand up to the aliens in a direct confrontation. We've been using guerrilla tactics, sabotaging their supply lines, and trying to strike at their weaker spots." Ethan glanced at the map. "It's a start, but it's not enough." "We know," Rachel said. "That's why we need you. You're one of the few soldiers left with real combat experience. And we need a leader who can inspire people to keep going. The aliens think we're nothing, but we've got something they don't: human ingenuity." Ethan didn't hesitate. "What's the plan?" "We've been trying to reverse engineer their technology," Rachel explained. "We've managed to hack into some of their smaller AI drones, but the bigger ones are more complex. However, we got one thing that might turn the tide: an old military satellite hidden in Earth's orbit. It's a relic from the Cold War, but with the right tools, we could use it to disrupt the aliens' communications. It might be our only shot at giving humanity a fighting chance." Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Where do we start?" First, we need to assemble a team, Rachel said. We'll need tech experts to hack into the satellite, soldiers to protect them, and a few good leaders to organize the chaos. It was a risk, but it was a risk they had to take. Ethan knew that if they didn't act now, the aliens would only tighten their grip on Earth. Humanity would be crushed underfoot. Days passed in the underground base, and Ethan threw himself into the preparations. The resistance worked tirelessly, repairing old equipment, modifying weapons, and training for the assault. Ethan led drills with a small team of soldiers. They practiced hand-to-hand combat, close-quarter shooting, and the most important skill of all, staying alive. During the quieter moments, when the drills were over and the camp settled into a tense silence, Ethan thought about his fallen comrades. Bonner, the friend who had sacrificed his life during the battle, lingered in his mind. Ethan wasn't the kind of man to let grief take him down, but it was hard to shake the memory. His team had been everything to him, and now they were gone. But he couldn't dwell on it. The resistance needed him. One evening, as the group gathered to discuss their next move, Rachel approached Ethan. "There's one more thing," she said quietly. "The aliens aren't just here for the planet. They got a reason for targeting Earth, and if we don't stop them now, they'll keep moving from world to world. We'll be their test run. If we lose this fight, there's no stopping them." The weight of her words hit Ethan hard. The fate of Earth was intertwined with something much larger than any one battle. He looked around at the faces of the resistance members. There were no guarantees. The odds were impossible. But as long as humanity had hope, they had a chance. Ethan stood up, addressing the group. "We fight, not because we think we can win, but because we have no choice. This is our planet, and we're not going to let them take it without a fight. Let's show them what humanity is made of." The room erupted in applause, a surge of energy that spread through the resistance like wildfire. The fight for Earth wasn't over. It had only just begun. The resistance had its first real victory. The alien forces had been repelled from a small town on the outskirts of what used to be New York. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was a start. A glimmer of hope in the middle of overwhelming darkness. Captain Ethan Ford stood on the edge of the makeshift command center, watching as soldiers and civilians worked together to repair damaged structures and tend to the wounded. Their faces were tired, their bodies worn from the constant fighting, but there was something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. A fire, a renewed sense of purpose. They were still alive. They had fought back, and they could do it again. But in the midst of the celebrations, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something more was coming. The alien forces, despite their vast superiority, hadn't pulled back for no reason. They were playing a game, and Ethan wasn't sure what their next move would be. He was snapped out of his thoughts when Rachel approached, her face grim. "We have a problem," she said, her voice low. "There's been a shift in the alien leadership. Something's changed." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "They'd brought in someone new," Rachel continued. "Someone important. An alien princess." Ethan frowned, unsure of what to make of it. "A princess." Rachel nodded. "Yes, she's been seen at the center of their operations. We don't know exactly who she is, but the fact that they've put her in charge of a major operation speaks volumes. We're guessing she's high up in their hierarchy." Ethan's mind raced. The aliens had been ruthless, merciless in their attacks on Earth, and now they had brought in someone who could be even more dangerous. If this princess was as powerful as they thought, she could change everything. "We need to find out more about her," Ethan said, already forming a plan in his mind. "What's the next step?" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "We're sending a small reconnaissance team to infiltrate one of their bases. We need to gather intel on her, figure out what she's planning. If we can learn anything about her weaknesses, it might give us the upper hand." Ethan nodded. "Count me in." That night, Ethan and a small team of soldiers prepared for their mission. They were going in under the cover of darkness, using every trick they knew to avoid detection. The air was thick with tension as they climbed into their transport, weapons strapped to their sides and eyes sharp with focus. This wasn't a simple recon mission. It was a gamble. The alien forces were everywhere, and even the slightest mistake could cost them everything. As their transport hurtled toward the alien base, Ethan couldn't help but think about the princess. Who was she? What did she want with Earth? And most importantly, why had the aliens brought her here? There was something about the way Rachel had spoken about her that made Ethan uneasy. This wasn't just a leader. This wasn't just another enemy. The princess was different. The transport touched down on the outskirts of the enemy base, hidden from view by the dense trees surrounding them. The soldiers moved quickly and quietly, their footsteps muffled by the soft ground. Ethan's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was no time for hesitation. They infiltrated the base with surgical precision, avoiding patrols and ducking into shadows when necessary. They reached the main command center, and that's when they saw her. An alien princess unlike anything Ethan had imagined. She was tall, her skin a shimmering shade of violet, and her eyes glowed with a soft, ethereal light. She stood at the center of the control room, surrounded by alien officers who hung on her every word. Her presence was commanding, but there was something else, something unsettling about her. Ethan watched from his hiding spot as the princess spoke, her voice low and commanding. He couldn't understand the alien language, but the tone was unmistakable, cold, calculating, and ruthless. It was clear that this was a leader who had no intention of losing. "She's different," one of Ethan's soldiers whispered. "She doesn't look like the others." Ethan didn't reply. He couldn't take his eyes off her. There was an aura of power around her, something that made even the toughest soldiers on the battlefield hesitate. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was the force behind the alien invasion, the mind guiding their every move. And then something unexpected happened. The princess turned, her eyes scanning the room as if sensing their presence. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Had they been discovered? Was it over? But she didn't react as he expected. Instead, her eyes lingered for a moment, almost as if she were searching. Her gaze swept over the room, but she didn't seem to spot them. Ethan's team held their breath, staying as still as possible. It felt like time itself had slowed down. Then, with a slight shake of her head, the princess turned away. She spoke again in her alien language, giving orders to her officers. Ethan's heart was still pounding, but he knew they had just been given a precious opportunity. They had to get out, report back, and prepare for whatever was coming next. They quickly made their way back to the transport, leaving the base behind them. But as they flew back to the resistance camp, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the princess knew they were there. The way she had looked into the room, it was almost as if she had sensed something beyond the normal human senses. Ethan's mind raced. What kind of power did she possess? Was she simply another alien leader, or was there something more to her than met the eye? The teen returned to base, and Ethan immediately went to Rachel. "We saw her," he said, his voice grim. "She's real, and she's powerful." Rachel looked at him, her face serious. "What do we know about her?" "Not much," Ethan replied. "But I've got a feeling. She's not like the other aliens. She's different, and we need to find out what she's really after." The war for Earth had just taken a darker turn, and Ethan knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The alien princess was out there, and if humanity had any hope of surviving, they had to uncover the secret she was hiding before it was too late. The air was thick with tension as Ethan and his team stood at the edge of the battlefield. The resistance had managed to gather enough resources, and the plan was set. The final push was coming, and everything depended on their next move. The alien forces had fortified their position, their massive war machines standing like cold giants against the sky. Ethan could hear the distant hum of their advanced technology, a reminder of how outmatched they were. That night, Ethan and a small team of soldiers prepared for their mission. They were going in under the cover of darkness, using every trick they knew to avoid detection. The air was thick with tension as they climbed into their transport, weapons strapped to their sides and eyes sharp with focus. This wasn't a simple recon mission. It was a gamble. The alien forces were everywhere, and even the slightest mistake could cost them everything. As their transport hurtled toward the alien base, Ethan couldn't help but think about the princess. Who was she? What did she want with Earth? And most importantly, why had the aliens brought her here? There was something about the way Rachel had spoken about her that made Ethan uneasy. This wasn't just a leader. This wasn't just another enemy. The princess was different. The transport touched down on the outskirts of the enemy base, hidden from view by the dense trees surrounding them. The soldiers moved quickly and quietly, their footsteps muffled by the soft ground. Ethan's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was no time for hesitation. They infiltrated the base with surgical precision, avoiding patrols and ducking into shadows when necessary. They reached the main command center, and that's when they saw her. An alien princess unlike anything Ethan had imagined. She was tall, her skin a shimmering shade of violet, and her eyes glowed with a soft, ethereal light. She stood at the center of the control room, surrounded by alien officers who hung on her every word. Her presence was commanding, but there was something else, something unsettling about her. Ethan watched from his hiding spot as the princess spoke, her voice low and commanding. He couldn't understand the alien language, but the tone was unmistakable, cold, calculating, and ruthless. It was clear that this was a leader who had no intention of losing. "She's different," one of Ethan's soldiers whispered. "She doesn't look like the others." Ethan didn't reply. He couldn't take his eyes off her. There was an aura of power around her, something that made even the toughest soldiers on the battlefield hesitate. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was the force behind the alien invasion, the mind guiding their every move. And then something unexpected happened. The princess turned, her eyes scanning the room as if sensing their presence. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Had they been discovered? Was it over? But she didn't react as he expected. Instead, her eyes lingered for a moment, almost as if she were searching. Her gaze swept over the room, but she didn't seem to spot them. Ethan's team held their breath, staying as still as possible. It felt like time itself had slowed down. Then, with a slight shake of her head, the princess turned away. She spoke again in her alien language, giving orders to her officers. Ethan's heart was still pounding, but he knew they had just been given a precious opportunity. They had to get out, report back, and prepare for whatever was coming next. They quickly made their way back to the transport, leaving the base behind them. But as they flew back to the resistance camp, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the princess knew they were there. The way she had looked into the room, it was almost as if she had sensed something beyond the normal human senses. Ethan's mind raced. What kind of power did she possess? Was she simply another alien leader, or was there something more to her than met the eye? The team returned to base, and Ethan immediately went to Rachel. "We saw her," he said, his voice grim. "She's real, and she's powerful." Rachel looked at him, her face serious. "What do we know about her?" "Not much," Ethan replied. "But I've got a feeling. She's not like the other aliens. She's different, and we need to find out what she's really after." The war for Earth had just taken a darker turn, and Ethan knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The alien princess was out there, and if humanity had any hope of surviving, they had to uncover the secret she was hiding before it was too late. The air was thick with tension as Ethan and his team stood at the edge of the battlefield. The resistance had managed to gather enough resources, and the plan was set. The final push was coming, and everything depended on their next move. The alien forces had fortified their position, their massive war machines standing like cold giants against the sky. Ethan could hear the distant hum of their advanced technology, a reminder of how outmatched they were. The princess smiled, but it was a smile that sent chills down his spine. "You underestimate us," Human, you always have." Before Ethan could respond, the battle erupted around them. Alien drones charged forward, their weapons charged and ready. The resistance fought back with everything they had, but the odds were stacked against them. The princess stood at the center, as if her mere presence gave the aliens strength. They fought harder, their movements faster, their attacks deadlier. It was chaos. Ethan's heart raced as he dove for cover, returning fire while trying to keep his team safe. But he could see it now. The aliens had something more than just superior technology. They had the will to win. And that will came from the princess. As the battle raged, Ethan realized something. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a fight for the future of Earth. He couldn't let them lose. Not now. Not when humanity's last hope was standing before him. With one final push, Ethan and his team surged forward, overwhelming the alien forces and reaching the princess. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something. Fear, surprise. The princess never expected to see humans fight this hard. Then, with a final blast, the resistance broke through. The princess's forces crumbled, and the control center exploded in a blinding flash of light. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. The resistance had won. Earth had won. Ethan stood over the wreckage, breathing heavily, as the last of the alien forces retreated. The battle for Earth was over, but the fight for survival was just beginning. Humanity had proven that they weren't just survivors. They were fighters, and no matter what came next, they would never stop. The victory was short-lived. As the smoke cleared and the echoes of battle faded into the distance, the reality set in. Earth had won the battle, but not the war. The alien forces had retreated, leaving behind broken equipment and fallen soldiers, but it was clear that the princess's retreat wasn't a sign of surrender. It was a temporary measure, a way to regroup, reassess, and come back stronger. The fight was far from over. Ethan stood amidst the wreckage, his uniform torn and stained with the dust and blood of battle. The adrenaline from the fight still buzzed in his veins, but there was a heaviness in his chest. They had won a major battle, yes, but what did it mean when the enemy was so vast, so powerful? The princess was still out there, and as much as they had hoped to cripple her forces, it was clear now that this wasn't a single decisive blow. It was just the beginning of something darker. "We've got to move fast." Rachel's voice broke through Ethan's thoughts, her face pale but determined. "They'll be back, and when they come, we'll need every advantage we can get." Ethan nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. The alien forces were not going to disappear. The princess had shown them her power, and they were certain to come back with everything they had left. Earth was on the brink of an even larger war. The time for small victories was over. This would be the final stand. The resistance had pulled back to their underground base, deep within the heart of the Earth's last remaining safe zone. It wasn't much, a few battered buildings, a couple of old military bunkers, and some scattered supplies. But it was home now, and it was the last place standing between the human race and total extinction. "We've got one shot," Ethan said, his voice steady as he addressed the small group of soldiers gathered around him. "We know they're coming. We can't let them overwhelm us again. This time, we hit them before they hit us." Rachel had spent the last few hours coordinating with their allies, organizing a plan of attack. The resistance forces were spread thin, but they had gathered a small army of volunteers, survivors from the cities and towns who had managed to evade the aliens. They were ready to fight. The question was, would it be enough? As Ethan walked through the base, he saw the faces of the soldiers around him. Some were young, barely more than kids, with eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. Others were older, veterans of the previous conflicts, their faces hard as stone. They had all lost so much: family, friends, homes. But they were still here. They were still fighting. The final stand would happen tonight. The aliens had established a new command post on the outskirts of what had once been Washington, D.C. They were preparing to launch a full-scale assault on the remaining human strongholds, and if they succeeded, it would be the end. The Resistance's goal was simple: take down the alien command structure before the princess could marshal her forces. If they could destroy her leadership, maybe, just maybe, they could break the aliens' will to fight. Night fell quickly, the dark sky filled with the distant hum of alien warships. Ethan's heart raced as he gave his final instructions to his team. "We move in at 0 hour," he said. "Stick together, stay focused, and most importantly, stay alive." The air was thick with the sounds of distant engines and the low growl of alien weapons powering up. It felt like the calm before the storm. The ground trembled underfoot as the first signs of the alien advance were spotted on the horizon. There were no more tricks, no more last-minute surprises. This was it. Ethan and his team climbed into the transport vehicles, their hearts heavy but resolute. They moved out under the cover of darkness, their ships cloaked to avoid detection. The battlefield ahead would be treacherous. Alien drones, war machines, and the elite guard of the princess were all waiting. But there was no turning back now. As they neared the alien command post, the atmosphere seemed to thicken. The glow of alien technology lit the landscape, casting eerie shadows over the remnants of the city. The Resistance had infiltrated the outer defenses, but it wasn't going to be easy. They had to break through the perimeter and reach the heart of the command center where the princess was said to be hiding. "Keep moving," Rachel's voice crackled over the comms. "We're almost there." But just as they approached their target, the first wave of alien forces appeared. Massive war machines, towering over the humans, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The Resistance had no choice but to engage, their rifles firing in unison as they rushed toward the enemy. The ground erupted in explosions, the air filled with smoke and dust as the two forces collided. Ethan ducked behind cover, firing his weapon at the approaching aliens. The sound of gunfire was deafening, and the battlefield was chaos. He could see the alien princess's personal guard advancing with ruthless precision, their armor sleek and deadly. The Resistance had no choice but to fight for every inch of ground. The battle raged on, the clash of human and alien forces shaking the very earth beneath them. Ethan could see the princess's war machines, their weapons firing relentlessly at the Resistance fighters. But through the chaos, something shifted. The humans were holding their ground. The aliens were faltering. Ethan's heart surged with hope. "We can do this," Rachel shouted over the comms. "Push forward. We're almost there." They were close now. So close. Ethan could see the massive alien command center up ahead, the glowing lights indicating the heart of the invasion. They were only a few yards away when the princess appeared, standing tall, her violet skin glowing eerily in the midst of the battle. She raised her hand, and the battlefield fell silent. "This is where it ends," she said, her voice ringing out across the chaos. "You cannot win, humans. You are nothing." But Ethan wasn't listening. His team had one final push to make. With everything they had, they surged forward. And in that moment, as if the universe itself held its breath, the Resistance tore through the final line of defense, reaching the heart of the alien command post. The princess's forces crumbled. The aliens began to retreat, their will to fight shattered by the determination of the humans. Ethan's team stood victorious, the alien command center burning behind them. They had done it. They had broken the aliens' hold on Earth. The final stand had been won, and humanity had proven that they were not just survivors. They were warriors, and they would fight until the end. The first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the battlefield. The once dark sky was now bright with the promise of a new day. Ethan stood alone, his eyes scanning the horizon. The battle was over. The war, at least the worst of it, was finished. But as he looked out over the wreckage of the alien forces, he knew that this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning. The fight had been brutal, and the losses were heavy. Many of his friends, his comrades, had fallen. Rachel, who had been a constant source of strength and determination, had been injured during the final push, but she had survived. The resistance fighters were all battered and bruised, some limping as they made their way through the wreckage, but there was a sense of quiet pride among them. They had done it. Earth was free. As Ethan took a deep breath, he felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The princess and her forces were defeated. The alien technology, once so mysterious and intimidating, was now in their hands. But despite the victory, there was still so much to rebuild. So many lives lost, so many cities destroyed. The world was a different place now, forever marked by the scars of the invasion. Ethan, a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Rachel, her face pale but determined, walking slowly toward him. She had a slight limp, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. "Hey, how are you feeling?" Ethan asked, his voice soft but concerned. He had seen the damage the final battle had done to her, and even though he knew she was tough, he still worried. Rachel smiled faintly, her eyes tired but resolute. "I'll be okay. We all will be. The hard part is over." Ethan nodded, but his mind was still racing. What now? The aliens were gone, but the world had been left in ruins. They had won the battle, but the real work, rebuilding humanity's future, was just beginning. As they walked through the remains of the alien command center, the resistance fighters began to gather. They were no longer just a group of survivors. They were the heart of a new world. Some were mourning the losses, others were celebrating the victory. But there was one thing on everyone's mind: rebuilding. The Earth was theirs again, and now they had to figure out what to do with it. Ethan paused as he looked at the wreckage. The alien warships that had once filled the skies now lay abandoned and broken. The technology that had once seemed so terrifying was now nothing more than scrap metal. There was a strange sense of peace in knowing that the invaders were no longer a threat. But there was also a lingering feeling of uncertainty. What would they do with all this alien technology? How would they rebuild society? What kind of world would they create from the ashes of the old? "I don't know where to start," Rachel said, breaking through his thoughts. "The world's been changed, Ethan. We've seen how far the aliens are willing to go to take what's ours. I don't think we'll ever be the same after this." Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. "Maybe we won't be, but we're here. We survived, and we're not going to let that happen again. We'll rebuild. We'll learn from what happened, and we'll make sure that the future is different." Rachel smiled, a spark of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind them both that there was still something worth fighting for. The fight had been long, and it had taken everything they had. But they had proven that humanity was resilient. They were survivors, and now they had to prove that they could thrive. The first steps toward rebuilding started with the small things. The soldiers began to clear the wreckage of the alien command center, salvaging what they could. The medical teams worked tirelessly to treat the wounded, while others began to organize the resources they had taken from the aliens. There were weapons, technology, and supplies that could be used to defend Earth if they ever faced another threat. But the most important thing they salvaged wasn't the technology. It was hope. They had defeated the invaders, and that meant they could defeat anything. In the days that followed, the world slowly began to change. The survivors worked together, rebuilding cities and towns that had been destroyed. They helped each other, relying on the strength of their unity to move forward. The knowledge they had gained from the aliens' technology was invaluable, but they didn't let it corrupt them. They used it responsibly, making sure it was a tool for progress, not domination. But it wasn't just about technology. It was about something deeper. The war had shown them what they were capable of, not just as individuals, but as a species. The unity they had found in the face of destruction would be the foundation of their new world. Ethan found himself looking at the stars again one night, just as he had before the war. But this time, It was different. The sky didn't feel so dark. It didn't feel so distant. The stars were still out there, but they didn't seem as unreachable anymore. The invasion had taken a lot from them, but it had also given them something in return. Strength. The strength to face the unknown, to rebuild, and to protect their future. As Ethan stood there, lost in thought, Rachel walked up beside him. They stood together, gazing at the stars, knowing that they had fought for more than just survival. They had fought for the future. "Do you think we'll be ready for whatever comes next?" Rachel asked softly. Ethan looked at her, a sense of determination filling him. "We're ready. We've survived the worst, and now we have each other. We'll be okay." The world had changed. It would never be the same again. But as the sun rose higher in the sky, bringing with it the warmth of a new day, Ethan knew that the fight for Earth's future wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, humanity would face it together.